Good morning. We're about to start the presentation. Please wait for a minute to allow all attendees to connect. Good morning. My name is Sebastian Perez Ferreiro. I'm News Managing Editor at BN Americas. Today, we will be presenting the main findings of our 2022 Infra Capex Report, which includes the investment plans of the major operators in Latin America. I will go through the key conclusions of the report, and then my colleague, Research Managing Editor Laura Superno, will moderate a conversation with three members of our content team to talk about the region's outlook. Joining her will be our Brazil Bureau Chief, Rogerio Gelmayer, our Mexican and Central American infrastructure reporter, Ariel Rodriguez, and Javiera Gracia, who covers the Southern Cone. You can ask questions on the chat function at the right hand of your screen. BN America subscribers can read and download our Infra Capex report, which is in the report section of our business intelligence platform. Let's begin. Brazil is facing a combination of slow economic growth and rising interest rates, with robust ongoing concessions agenda. Presidential elections are scheduled for October. Incumbent President Jair Bolsonaro, up for re-election, is a strong advocate of the concessions agenda and more private sector investment in infrastructure, while former President Luis Inácio Lula da Silva, who seeks to return to power, defends more government investment in the sector. The Bolsonaro administration plans to offer over 150 infrastructure assets this year, with the hopes of bringing in nearly $79 billion in investments. Concessions will be offered in the airports, railways, highways, and port segments. In the near term, it appears that companies in general do still have cash available for investments because they managed to raise capital before interest rates began to rise. Now we go to Chile. While young center-left Gabriel Boric's victory in last year's presidential election was seen as heralding a sea change in Chile's economic policy, when it comes to infrastructure, President Boric is not looking to reinvent the wheel. Boric chose two former government officials, Juan Carlos Muñoz and Juan Carlos Garcia, for the post of Transport and Public Works Ministers, respectively. Both are looking to tweak and not overhaul the current system. The previous government left $16.7 billion tenders for concessions in the 2022-2026 period. The current administration said projects will be reviewed but not halted. Ongoing transport projects include the expansions of Santiago's Metro Line number 2 and number 3, as well as the new Line 7, a $2.5 billion project. Meanwhile, studies are set to advance for Lines 8 and 9 and the expansion of Line 4. Desalination projects in the north have gained importance, though long timelines for environmental evaluations and acquiring maritime concessions have been cited as major bottlenecks. While the private sector continues to show a heavy appetite for investing in infrastructure and projects in Mexico, all opportunities continue to be tied down to the will and approval of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. 3 years into the president's term, it appears that 2022 will bring fewer opportunities in the realm of public infrastructure projects, in part because all major contracts for the Maya train mega project have already been awarded, and also because the president continues to award key projects to the Defense Ministry, which recently completed the Felipe Ángeles International Airport without using any outside contractors. Yet the private sector remains hopeful about a third package of the National Infrastructure Program, which will include transport, water and waste, and energy proposals. It's not clear when the third package of projects will be unveiled by the government. Packages 1 and 2 included 69 projects totaling nearly $26 billion. In 2021, Colombia focused its fourth generation infrastructure program, which is now around 65% complete. So far, 6 works have been delivered, and by August, when President Ivan Duque finishes his term, 13 more are due for completion. The 10 remaining projects will be delivered over the next 2 years. Duque has been racing to deliver and tender as many projects as possible before he leaves office. On April 1st, the government signed the contracts for North Access 2 and launched documents for ALO South, 2 road projects to improve connectivity between capital Bogota and the north and south of the country. And by August, the government aims to tender the $866 million Santuario Caño Alegre project, which will improve connectivity between the central region and 8 municipalities in the Antioquia department. Also on the list is the La Dorada Chiriguaná rail project. Colombia is also launching into its next major round of infrastructure developing, having approved in November its policy for fifth generation projects, which seek to drive intermodal development. It includes a first wave of 14 road, airport, navigability, and rail projects with investments totaling nearly $6 billion. Now I turn to my colleagues Laura, Javiera, Rogerio, and Ariel. Laura?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Sebastián. We'll just wait a minute to let everyone on the panel connect their mics and their cameras. Okay, hello, everyone. Ariel, Javiera, Rogerio, it's a pleasure to be here discussing infrastructure with you guys today. You know, based on or coming off of what we heard from Sebastián and what you all reported in the Infrastructure Capex Report, I'd like to go ahead and ask you a few questions to further expand on the topics and see where the countries are headed in terms of infrastructure. So let's look first to Brazil, please, Rogerio. You know, looking ahead to this year's presidential election, have we seen any further clarity emerging on the candidates' positions on infrastructure? Or, you know, if not, when could we expect to have more detail on this? And also, as we do go into the electoral period, you know, do you expect to see any impact on investment or project activity as a result of any uncertainty that might arise?
Yes. Hello, Laura. Hello, everyone. So first of all, Laura, according to recent surveys, it's important to highlight that the October presidential election in Brazil will be a fight between the incumbent president Jair Bolsonaro and the former leftist president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, since no other candidate so far has came up with any real chance. In general terms, Bolsonaro is advocate of the concessions and the privatizations agenda, and he looks for more private sector investment in infrastructure. Meanwhile, Lula defends more government investments in infrastructure. Actually, you have seen emerging recent months in Brazil a discussion to promote a less rigid federal budget to enable more public investment in infrastructure. Even Bolsonaro admitted this possibility, since the fact that the public investment in Brazil is at the historically low level. But now talk about the potential impacts of the elections. Of course, with the approach of the October elections, investors, stakeholders likely to be more selective in terms of the assets, in terms of the potential auctions in various sectors, also in terms of infrastructure segment.
Okay, so looking at those projects that are coming up in the near term, there's a big program of tenders that's ongoing. If you could tell us a little more about what those near-term opportunities are in the sector, you know, especially considering this list that the Bolsonaro administration is really trying to get going before possibly leaving office for good.
Yes. Actually, you have an intense agenda of infrastructure projects in the highway segment. You have a lot of projects to be auctioned, not only by the federal government, but also from the state governments, especially in São Paulo and the Paraná states. And in terms of the federal government projects, also important to highlight the planned concessions of the airports. The federal government is planning to offer the concession for 15 airports in the second half of this year. And in the port segments, a lot of projects also are planned in terms of leasing of terminals, and also the concession of ports authority. The main highlight in terms of ports, of course, is about the Santos port, which is the busiest port in South America.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And considering those opportunities, the landscape of infrastructure operators and builders has been changing somewhat over recent years in Brazil, and also given this idea that you mentioned that they're investors or operators may be more selective in the projects that they choose to try to participate in. Which companies or what type of company is going to be best positioned in the near term to capture these opportunities and also, be willing to absorb some of this uncertainty or risk?
Yes, the answer for this question, Laura, is different considering the segments.
Okay.
For example, in the highway segment, clearly you have the predominance of two large companies in most recent auctions, which are the CCR and the Eco Rodovias. In view of that, these companies, mainly CCR, have attracted a kind of new shareholders, strengthening its capital base, both to make investment in new concessions already assumed, and also to look for new opportunities. In the airport sector, you are seeing a more diversification of participants. For example, in contact with the government officials that BN Americas made a few weeks ago, for the planned auction of 15 airports, so far 13 different companies, including national and international companies, already show interest to participate in this auction. And also in the port segment, this is more complex, because this is not so common, the concession of a ports authority. So the government is engaged in a lot of meetings. For example, at the start of this month, the government representatives were in US to present to potential investors details of the concessions of ports, especially with regarding Santos Airport. At that opportunity, government officials held meetings with, for example, sovereign health funds, especially from Arab world, and also with investment funds across the globe.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rogerio, for the insights. Let's move over to Ariel now in Mexico. We've been waiting quite a long time for this third package of the National Infrastructure Program to be unveiled. Could you tell us kind of what is the most recent talk or expectation around the arrival of that package? And because this, if when it's launched, or if it's launched, maybe you can comment on that, would really open up a list of new project opportunities for the private sector.
Hello, sorry about that. Hi everyone. Yes, Laura, as you mentioned, the last thing we know about this very long-awaited infrastructure program is that it's ready, it's completed. The government should present it any time now. But at the same time, we've been waiting for it for over a year. This was supposed to be presented last year, and so far, what we know is that the government has the last okay to present it. The latest news about it is that the head of the Consejo Coordinador Empresarial, which is the the main private sector entity in charge of the coordinating investments for the program, has everything ready to go. But like I said, the government has a lot to say on it.
I mean, there do seem to be a lot of politics involved, not only, you know, what the President Lopez Obrador's plans are for the sector and you know, private versus state investment, as well as, you know, his relationship with the private sector leaders that have been very involved in creating the program in general. You know, is this the main obstacle here, and how could we expect to see this, you know, playing out over this year?
Yes, Laura. Basically, the government has said, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has said that he has had his differences with the private sector, and this may be the main factor behind delaying the program, which is at this point the only or the most important infrastructure opportunity for the sector. However, as we said in the report, the private sector is still very, very bullish about what the content will be. Content, we are not that 100% sure about what's going to be in it, but sources within the Consejo Coordinador Empresarial, the chamber, and the government say it's going to be very juicy. It's going to be a lot of opportunities. Just politics is involved, and just politics is the main factor delaying or approving it. It will all depend whether the AMLO administration decides to give it in some case. Hopefully, we expect it will be this year.
Right. Okay. And you know, in absence of the third package, you know, how would you describe the opportunities for developers and investors this year in Mexico? Are people trying to get into other opportunities in the meantime? Are they really waiting for the the third package? And if it never comes, you know, what can we say about the opportunities in Mexico?
Yeah, so basically we see that the main projects of AMLO had already been tendered. These projects have already been awarded. AMLO will not launch any other bigger projects at the moment until the end of his term in 2024. However, there have been some new opportunities that are not necessarily related to the private sector, but rather the public sector. I'm going to cite as example Nuevo León State, which is a bordering state with the United States, and the governor has plans of tendering at least 3 new metro lines in this year, in addition to other projects such as 2 major highways that will lead to the United States. So yes, the infrastructure package is probably the most important infrastructure opportunity for the private sector at this point, but there are also other smaller or local opportunities opening up little by little for the sector.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good to hear. I think that'll be, you know, give a little more hope as we wait for that package to arrive. Thank you very much, Ariel. Javiera, we'll turn to you now. In Chile, you know, one of the main topics that is under discussion today in Chile is the new constitution. The Constitutional Convention published a draft recently. We're waiting for a final version in July, and then of course there will be this plebiscite vote on the document. So, you know, I'd like you to tell us, please, you know, what the impacts would be for the infrastructure sector, considering, you know, the draft or the work of the convention that we've seen so far.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. And I was lucky enough to talk to a member of Libertad y Desarrollo, which is a conservative-leaning think tank here in Santiago, just a couple of days regarding the potential impacts of the new constitution on infrastructure, especially in concessions, which is, they were kind of concerned at one point that they were going to pass a norm that will basically ban the state from celebrating concession contracts for highways, but that didn't pass. Well, concessions aren't exactly mentioned by name in the draft document that we have right now. They could be something in the so-called transitory norms that will be studied between now and July when the final draft is ready. But the main concerns are that now the state has this very expanded role, and that could somehow undermine the concessionaires that have been operating since the 90s when this whole system was set up. And at the same time, the concession systems now has this sort of bad reputation among the public, especially when it comes to toll tariffs. There was this movement called No Más TAG, which basically gained a lot of support during the 2019 protests, and this has been kind of reflected in some of the norms that have been passed, although the one banning concessions didn't get through the 2/3 of the Constitutional Assembly. However, the issue with the more expanded role of the state, obviously, that could obviously lead to less concession tenders being tendered. But at the same time, I don't see the government trying to cut back into the concession system, because the election of Gabriel Boric, this was seen as a seismic change in terms of political orientation in Chile. But really, it's more about tweaks rather than tabula rasa, so to speak. But at the same, the other main concern regarding concessions and infrastructure, in particular in the Constitution, is what's going to happen with water. Water rights would be no more. What's going to happen with reservoir concessions? What's going to happen with water utilities, which were privatized in the 90s?
Indeed, and in terms of those areas, so far, what is the impact that would come from the draft that has been drawn up so far?
The biggest fear is that it will erode the legal certainty that concessionaires have enjoyed for these past 30 years. But at the same time, even current authorities believe that, in retrospect, some of the conditions that concessionaires placed in the 90s could be reviewed. But the biggest fear that concessionaires have is to lose the legal framework they have, which has been very advantageous for them, and it has given them a lot of certainties. And it has also allowed them to sometimes win arbitrations against the state.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Javi. And now looking at the government itself, what the new administration has been doing so far in terms of, you mentioned more just tweaks rather than any kind of major overhaul. Looking specifically kind of at the infrastructure program that they inherited. What has been the approach so far in terms of advancing that agenda?
Yeah, interestingly enough, there hasn't been any concession tenders launched under Boric so far. That's one thing. And at the same time, there hasn't been any bid opening for any of the tenders launched in the previous government, although delays were part of the norm with Piñera, so nothing new there. Boric has said that the adjustment period has ended, but that's not 100% true. There hasn't been that many public work tenders either. I have been lucky enough to speak a lot with public ministers, Transport Minister Juan Carlos Muñoz, regarding the transport infrastructure agenda. And one of the main topics that there seems to be going around is decentralization. Chile, as many of you know, is a very centralized country, both in terms of economic activity and also in terms of demographics. And on that front, one thing that Boric and his ministers are trying to do is give more protagonism to the newly created regional governments, for which we have had our first elections last year. One thing that Juan Carlos Muñoz told me about Boric is that he wants to leave the office with less power that he entered in. And for that reason, they are studying new regulations that would allow regional governments to develop their own infrastructure projects. I don't think that we're going to see stuff like the Bogota Metro type of projects coming from Santiago in the short term, but we could start seeing some regulatory changes that will give more leeway to local authorities to do this.
Yeah, well, that would be a pretty significant change, but perhaps not actually detrimental to the opportunities available in the country. Interesting. Correct. Thank you, Javi, for the insights on Chile. I did want to ask you also about Colombia briefly. We're getting very close now to the presidential elections at the end of this month, where the front runner is the left-leaning Gustavo Petro, who was a contender last time, but obviously did not win. What are the elements that we should be taking note of in terms of Petro and possible infrastructure policy if he does end up winning the election?
Well, Petro has at least gone on the record that he will prioritize infrastructures in the area of tertiary roads, or what we call it like very local roads. In other countries, we will call it rural. But at the same time, this wouldn't be that new, to be honest. From what I remember, these were on the influence of Invias. They're not concessions, but FYI. But the previous governments did have some program for that, so we wouldn't see, like, unless he's really trying to go to town on that, I wouldn't call it that big of a change. At the same time, however, some people believe that Petro's closeness with certain communities could result in even longer times for environmental permits, like consultation processes could take longer. Yet others see the positive side of this situation, because since Petro will be closer to these communities, maybe that could speed up the process for certain infrastructure projects that he's interested in. But at the same time, there's also the question on whether Petro's presidency and a shift to the left in Colombia, which, let's face it, that will be unprecedented, would mean a problem for the country's investment credit and the availability of resources in the market for infrastructure projects, because Colombia has a large concessions portfolio. We have the 5G infrastructure projects, and many in the previous program, the 4G, we had a lot of financing operations for PPPs in which international banks were involved in investment funds as well. So any deterioration in Colombia's market image could also affect the financing of these projects.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you very much, Javi. And just one last question, if for anyone who would like to comment. We've seen problematic levels of inflation emerging around Latin America, around the world, which is bringing upward pressure to interest rates. We mentioned this briefly about Brazil. And at the same time, in Brazil, Chile, and Mexico in particular, these countries are forecast for the slowest growth in the region this year, at least among the main economies of the region. Are these factors that you guys have seen as having any impact on activity and infrastructure investments or projects in the near term? Who wants to go first?
Please go ahead, Javiera, first, please.
Okay, thank you, Rogelio. Well, not so much I've seen an impact yet, but I've seen impacts on provision and on outlooks, predictions, that kind of stuff. The Chilean Chamber of Construction has cited inflation and especially material costs as the reason on why infrastructure investment in general in Chile is poised to drop. And obviously in countries such as Argentina, where inflation is getting even worse than what it already is, that also leaves the government with very little options trying to search for financing, because many of obviously they're trying to court foreign investors, but how they're going to pay if their currency is dropping even harder.
Here in Brazil, this is turning a very sensitive topic, especially in terms of the highway segment. This is very problematic because in terms of inputs, the asphalt prices, for example, here in Brazil, is increasing much higher than inflation. So companies in this segment are working currently to mitigate these impacts, but some executives of the segment already admitted to me that they are in conversations with the government, even to review certain contracts, actually to compensate the increase of costs. And also for the entire infrastructure segment, the other impact for that is in terms of the financing costs, because the central bank in Brazil is very aggressive in terms of response to combat inflation via the interest rate increase. So for companies now, it's much more expensive to looking for financing via capital markets or even via directly through the banks.
Thank you, Rogerio. I don't know, Ariel, if you'd like to comment about this in Mexico or any financing topics.
Yes, the financing area here in Mexico is still a little bit unsure. There isn't really a lot of information about it yet. The National Development Bank, which is the one in charge of financing a lot of the infrastructure projects, has just recently said something about inflation. So we are sure that there are problems with financing, but it's not a topic that has been talked a lot. Usually everything that has to do with public funds has already been secured. So regarding financing and other projects, it's something that we'll probably see here in Mexico in the upcoming months.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ariel. Thank you, Rogerio, and thank you, Javiera, for your insights on this, quite interesting panel discussion. We'll turn it back over now to Sebastián for the closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for being part of this panel. It's been a great conversation. I again remind all of BN America subscribers that you can read and download our Infra Capex report in our platform. For those of you who are not clients, I invite you to visit bnamericas.com and check out the great content that we publish daily. Have a great day.